When I first heard about the job at the old movie theater on the edge of town, I thought it was some kind of joke. A theater that only opened after midnight, no advertisements, no online presence, no posters in town, just word of mouth and a faded neon sign that flickered the words "The Silver Mirage." It had been closed down for decades, or at least that's what I believed. The building stood on a cracked stretch of highway outside of Ravens Hollow, Ohio, with boarded windows and peeling paint that made it look like the kind of place you'd pass by without a second glance. I needed work, though, and bad. Bills were piling up and the job market in town was dead. So, when an old man named Mercer approached me outside the grocery store and asked if I'd be willing to work nights, I said yes before I even knew what the job was. He handed me a wrinkled slip of paper with an address and the words, "Be there at 11:45. Don't be late." That first night, the drive out to the theater felt like a descent into another world. Fog rolled low across the cracked highway, and the streetlights grew fewer and fewer until it was just me and the road. When the theater finally came into view, I almost turned back. The building stood like a corpse, its neon sign buzzing faintly, casting a sickly light across the empty parking lot. But curiosity and desperation pushed me forward. Mercer was waiting for me at the door, dressed in a black suit that looked older than he was. His pale eyes seemed to glow faintly under the flickering light. He didn't waste time with greetings. Instead, he pressed a small black booklet into my hand. "These are the rules," he said. His voice was dry, like leaves crunching underfoot. "Read them. Follow them. If you don't, you won't last the night." I opened the booklet and skimmed through the list. The handwriting was jagged and hurried, as though someone had scrawled them down in fear. 1. The doors must be unlocked at exactly midnight. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. 2. Never sell a ticket. The guests already have theirs. 3. Do not look directly at the audience once they are seated. 4. Concessions must be prepared, but do not taste anything you serve. 5. If a guest speaks to you, respond politely, but never ask questions. 6. The projector must run continuously until dawn. Do not stop the film. 7. At closing, wait until the auditorium is completely empty before stepping inside. 8. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to leave before dawn. The list went on for several more rules, each more unsettling than the last. My stomach twisted as I read them. I looked up, ready to laugh nervously, but Mercer's face was grave. "These are not suggestions," he said. "They are the only thing keeping you alive." That was the moment I should have walked away. But instead I nodded. My bank account was down to 2 digits. Rent was due in a week. What was one strange night of work? The lobby smelled of dust and mold, the air heavy and stale. Rows of velvet seats stretched out into the darkness beyond the ticket booth, their once rich color faded to a dull brown. Cobwebs hung like curtains, and the popcorn machine in the concession stand looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Yet when I touched the counter, it wasn't dusty. It was clean, polished, as though someone had just wiped it down. Mercer left without another word, his footsteps echoing through the hollow building until the front door clicked shut. I was alone. At 11:59, I walked to the front doors. My hands trembled as I pulled the key from my pocket. The moment the clock struck midnight, I unlocked them. The doors swung open on their own. Figures began to drift inside, silent as shadows. They weren't like any customers I'd ever seen before. Their skin was pale, their eyes glassy, and their clothes were decades out of style. Some wore tattered suits, others faded dresses. A woman with pin curls and a cigarette holder brushed past me, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke that shouldn't have lingered in a building so stale. They didn't speak. They didn't acknowledge me. Each clutched a yellowed paper ticket, some so brittle I thought they'd crumble to dust. They filed into the theater, one after another, filling the seats with a weight that made the air heavy. I forced myself to look down, avoiding their faces. Rule number 3 burned in my mind. Don't look directly at the audience. Still, my curiosity nearly betrayed me. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone staring, their head tilted unnaturally, eyes glimmering faintly in the dark. My breath caught, but I forced myself to focus on the concession stand. The machine hummed to life the moment I touched it. Popcorn spilled into the bin, buttery and golden. The soda fountain hissed and fizzed, filling cups with bright liquid. It didn't make sense. This equipment had been dead for decades, yet it worked flawlessly, as if it had just been installed. One of the guests approached the counter. He was tall, his skin waxy, his lips cracked, his eyes locked onto mine with a hunger that made my stomach turn. "Popcorn," he rasped. I scooped a bag and handed it to him without a word. He leaned closer. "You're new." I swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." His grin stretched too wide, showing teeth that were yellowed and broken. He took the bag and shuffled back into the crowd without another sound. The projector whirred to life on its own, casting flickering light into the auditorium. The film that played wasn't one I recognized. The screen showed a black and white reel of people walking through a small town, their faces expressionless, their eyes dark. The sound was distorted, voices whispering words I couldn't understand. Hours passed in a haze of motion. I handed out concessions, swept the floor, avoided eye contact. The rules guided every step, and I clung to them like a lifeline. But as the night wore on, unease burrowed deeper into me. At one point, the reel snapped. The screen went white. My heart stopped. Rule 6 echoed in my head. The projector must run continuously until dawn. I scrambled into the booth, fumbling with the film. The air was freezing cold, my breath visible in the beam of light. My fingers shook as I threaded the reel back into place, and when the film flickered back to life, I felt eyes on me from the auditorium below. I didn't dare look. The rest of the night stretched on, the whispers from the screen seeping into my mind until I couldn't tell if they were coming from the film or from the guests themselves. I caught fragments of words, promises, warnings, prayers, and languages I didn't know. Finally, the first faint light of dawn crept through the boarded windows. The reel sputtered and died, the projector falling silent. One by one, the guests rose from their seats and drifted toward the doors. They didn't speak. They didn't acknowledge me. They simply vanished into the mist outside. When the auditorium was finally empty, I stepped inside. The seats were rotting, torn, eaten through with mold. The smell of decay hit me so hard I nearly gagged. The air was thick and heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. And yet I could still feel the warmth of bodies that had just been sitting there. I locked the doors as the sun rose. Mercer was waiting for me outside. His expression didn't change, but his eyes studied me carefully, as though measuring whether I'd survived intact. "You followed the rules," he said. "Good. You'll be back tonight." It wasn't a question, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, to quit, to never set foot in that place again, I nodded, because something had already taken hold of me. Something that whispered in my dreams that the theater wasn't just a place for the dead to watch movies. It was a place for them to watch us. The second night should have been easier. I told myself I knew what to expect now, that the rules were simple enough to follow if I just kept my head down. But from the moment I woke up that evening, there was a weight pressing on me, a heaviness that didn't feel like exhaustion, but something darker. It was as if the theater had followed me home, creeping into the corners of my apartment, whispering to me through the static of the television and the hum of the refrigerator. I almost didn't go back. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the cracked road that led to the theater, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The thought of walking through those doors again made my stomach twist. But rent was still looming, and Mercer's eyes from the night before wouldn't leave my mind. Cold, measuring, as if he already knew I'd return. The theater looked worse in the moonlight. Its neon sign buzzed weakly, one of the letters sputtering until it gave up entirely. The parking lot was empty again, not even a stray cat crossing the asphalt. As I approached the doors, the booklet of rules felt heavy in my pocket, like a stone dragging me down. Mercer wasn't there this time. The keys were already in the lock, waiting for me. My watch ticked louder than usual, and when the hands aligned at midnight, I turned the key. The doors swung open, just like before. They came in silence again, drifting shapes in the fog. Some of them I recognized from the first night. The woman with the cigarette holder, the tall man with cracked lips. But there were new ones too. A boy no older than 10 with hollow eyes and suspenders that looked soaked in something dark. An old woman dragging a cane that didn't touch the ground. Their tickets crumbled in their hands, yet somehow still held form as they handed them to no one and shuffled inside. I didn't look at them directly. My eyes stayed on the floor, on the scuffed tiles of the lobby. Still, I felt their gaze slide across me, sticky and lingering, as though they knew I was trying not to see them. The concessions came alive again, the machines groaning and humming. I filled bags of popcorn, yet poured drinks that fizzed unnaturally, the syrup too thick, the ice clinking like shards of bone. I kept my head down, following the rules, but something was different that night. The film that flickered to life on the screen wasn't the same black and white reel from before. This time it showed a street I knew, the main road through Raven's Hollow. Cars sat abandoned, their doors hanging open. Shops were dark, windows shattered. And in the middle of the street stood figures, blurred but unmistakably human, standing too still, their faces turned toward the screen. The whispers began again, but clearer now. I could almost make out words, my name maybe, a promise, a warning. I forced myself back to the counter, but my curiosity gnawed at me. I risked a glance toward the auditorium, not at the guests, but at the glowing screen. That's when I saw it. Among the blurred figures in the film, one of them moved, slowly, deliberately, not like the others, and it was walking closer to the camera, closer to me. I tore my eyes away before I could see its face. Rule 3 pounded in my skull. Don't look at the audience. But what about the screen? Did that count? A guest approached the counter, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was the boy in suspenders. His eyes were glassy, his face pale, his lips cracked as though he hadn't spoken in years. He set a crumpled dollar bill on the counter, though I knew I wasn't supposed to take payment. I pushed the bill back toward him. No charge, I said, my voice shaking. He didn't move. His hollow eyes locked on mine. Then, slowly, his lips parted. You'll be in it soon, he whispered. My chest tightened. I shoved a bag of popcorn into his small hands and stepped back, trying to steady my breathing. He shuffled away, leaving the bill on the counter. When I picked it up, the paper disintegrated into dust between my fingers. Hours blurred together. I swept the floor, wiped the counter, checked the projector, but my mind kept drifting to the screen. Each time I stole a glance, the figure was closer, its features still hidden in shadow. Its movements were too smooth, too intentional, as though it knew I was watching. By the time the first hints of dawn crept across the boarded windows, I was shaking. The guests filed out silently, their forms slipping into the mist. I waited until the auditorium was empty, then stepped inside. The smell was stronger that night. Not just mold, but something sharper, metallic, like blood. The seats sagged under invisible weight, torn fabric spilling stuffing like entrails. And on the screen, frozen in the final frame of the reel, was the figure. Closer now, its head tilted toward the camera, toward me. I killed the projector and fled. Outside, Mercer was waiting again. His pale eyes studied me with something like amusement. You're hearing them, aren't you? He asked. I swallowed hard. The whispers? He nodded. Good. It means they've noticed you. I don't want them to notice me, I snapped. His expression didn't change, but his tone did. Then follow the rules. Don't let your curiosity betray you. Curiosity is what killed the last usher. My stomach dropped. The last usher? Mercer turned toward the horizon where the sun was rising, casting the world in gray light. You'll last longer than he did. I can tell. They like you. I wanted to demand answers. Who were they? What was this place? Why did he keep hiring people like me, desperate and disposable? But the rules whispered in my mind, warning me not to ask questions. That day, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the frozen image of that figure on the screen, its head tilted, waiting for me. I kept hearing the boy's voice too, hollow and cold. You'll be in it soon. When night came, I sat in my car again, staring at the road to the theater. My whole body screamed not to go back, to leave town, to vanish before whatever this was consumed me. But the rules weren't just rules anymore. They were shackles, and something deep inside me already knew. I couldn't escape. The theater wanted me back. And I was starting to think I wanted it too. The third night was worse before it even began. I woke up in the late afternoon with the taste of ash in my mouth, though I hadn't smoked a day in my life. My apartment smelled faintly of popcorn, the stale buttery kind, and when I turned on the television, it flickered through static before settling on a black and white channel I didn't recognize. For just a second, I thought I saw the inside of the silver mirage on the screen, the rows of rotting seats, the flickering projector beam. I unplugged the television, but the smell of popcorn lingered. By the time I pulled into the parking lot that night, my nerves were already shredded. The theater loomed out of the fog, its neon buzzing faintly, the letters bending into unfamiliar shapes when I stared too long. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew better. I unlocked the doors at midnight sharp. This time, they didn't just drift in silently. I heard them. Shoes scuffing against the tile, dresses brushing across the floor, the faint rattle of coins in someone's pocket. Whispers threaded through the lobby, low and restless. It wasn't language I could understand, but it wrapped around me like a cold hand. I kept my eyes on the ground, the rules echoing in my head, but I couldn't ignore the sound of them. Their presence was heavier now, thicker, as though more had come tonight. And among them, I swore I heard someone laughing softly. The concessions machines roared to life, louder than before. Popcorn spilled over the edge of the bin. The soda fountain hissed violently, spraying sticky liquid across the counter. I scrambled to keep up, bagging popcorn, filling cups, handing them over with shaking hands. One of them leaned close as I handed him a cup. His breath was cold against my cheek. "You smell alive," he whispered. I forced a smile, though my hands trembled so badly the soda nearly slipped. He grinned, teeth too sharp, before melting back into the crowd. The screen lit up again, and this time I didn't even have to look to know it wasn't the same film. The whispers grew louder, pulling my gaze like a magnet. Against my better judgment, I glanced up. The film showed my street, my apartment building, my car parked outside. The camera was moving closer, shakily, as though held by unsteady hands. Each frame brought it closer to my door. I tore my eyes away, heart hammering. My stomach twisted violently and bile rose in my throat. The boy in suspenders appeared at the counter again, hollow-eyed, his hands stained dark. He set something on the counter. A photo. It was me, standing in my kitchen, pouring a glass of water. The angle was from inside the room, though I'd been alone. I shoved it back toward him. "No." He didn't move. His cracked lips twitched upward. "Soon." I wanted to scream, to throw the photograph in his face, to run out the doors and never come back. But the rules wrapped around me like chains. I forced myself to hand him a bag of popcorn instead. He took it, leaving the photo behind. I didn't touch it. The hours dragged on. The whispers never stopped. They grew louder, clearer, until I could pick out words. My name, my address, my fears. They seeped into me like water into stone, wearing me down. Halfway through the night, the projector sputtered. The reel jammed. My blood turned to ice. Rule 6. The projector must run continuously until dawn. I bolted into the booth. The film was tangled, the reel spinning uselessly. My fingers fumbled with the strips of celluloid, slick with something warm. When I pulled my hand back, my fingertips were smeared with red. Blood. The reel wasn't just film anymore. It pulsed faintly, veins running through the strips like living flesh. The whispers grew deafening in the booth, crawling into my ears, digging deep into my skull. "Thread it," they hissed. "Play it." My hands shook violently as I forced the reel back into the projector. The machine groaned, then whirred back to life. The whispers quieted to a low hum. When I dared glance at the screen from the booth window, the figure was back. The one I'd seen on the first night. Closer now. Its face still obscured by shadow, but its posture was unmistakably human. It tilted its head slowly, deliberately, as though it knew I was watching. I stumbled out of the booth, gasping for air. The guests were silent now. Every single one of them turned toward the screen. Their pale faces glowed faintly in the flickering light. None of them moved. None of them breathed. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure on the screen wasn't just part of the film anymore, that it was watching me the same way they were. When dawn finally crept through the cracks in the boarded windows, I was shaking so badly I could barely stand. The film sputtered to an end. The guests rose in unison, drifting toward the doors. I waited, trembling, until the auditorium was empty. But when I stepped inside, the photograph was waiting for me on one of the seats. I picked it up with numb fingers. It was another picture of me, sleeping this time, in my own bed. The air turned cold. I turned and fled, locking the doors behind me. Mercer was waiting again, leaning against my car like he'd been there all night. His pale eyes fixed on the photograph in my hand. He smiled faintly. "They've taken a liking to you," he said. I shoved the photo against his chest. "What the hell is this? How are they watching me? He tucked the picture into his coat pocket like it was nothing. They're watching everyone. The difference is they've chosen to let you see it. My voice cracked. I don't want them to see me. I don't want any of this. Mercer's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. You already belong to them. The moment you unlock those doors the first night, you let them in. His words hollowed me out. I wanted to argue, to tell him I could walk away. But deep down, I knew he was right. I could feel the theater inside me now, gnawing at my thoughts, twisting my dreams. Even if I left, it wouldn't let me go. That day I tried to stay awake, terrified of what I'd see if I closed my eyes. But exhaustion won. When I finally drifted off, my dreams weren't mine anymore. I was back in the theater, standing on the stage before the screen. The audience was full, every pale face turned toward me. And in the flickering light of the projector, the figure stepped forward at last. Closer. Closer. Until I realized it wasn't a stranger at all. It was me. By the fourth night, I didn't bother pretending to myself that I had a choice. The silver mirage wasn't just a job anymore. It was a trap. It had already wound its claws around me, digging deeper each night, and I knew that if I didn't show up, something worse would happen. Maybe the guests would find me in my sleep. Maybe the figure on the screen would step through into my living room. The moment I pulled into the lot, I noticed the change. The neon sign wasn't buzzing weakly anymore. It was blazing, glowing so bright it hurt my eyes, even though no one else should have been around to notice. For the first time, I wondered if the sign wasn't meant to lure customers at all, but to guide the dead back to their seats. The keys were already in the lock again. My hands shook as I gripped them, and for a second, I thought about throwing them into the fog and driving away. But the rules whispered in my mind like commandments, reminding me of Mercer's warning, reminding me of the photographs. I turned the key at midnight. The doors swung open, and the guests poured in. There were more of them tonight, so many that the air grew heavy with their presence, the lobby crowding until I had to press myself against the wall to avoid touching them. Their tickets crumbled in their hands. Their mouths moved in whispers that scraped across my skin like cold wind. Some looked like they just stepped out of a different century, their clothes moth-eaten and faded, while others looked fresher, like they could have died last week. The boy in suspenders wasn't there this time. Instead, a woman in a blood-stained nurse's uniform approached the counter. Her skin sagged loosely from her face, her eyes dull and sunken. She slid something across the counter. Not a dollar bill, not a ticket, something small and round, a tooth. I stared at it, frozen, the tiny object gleaming under the flickering light. She smiled faintly, though her lips didn't move right, splitting slightly at the edges. Popcorn, she rasped. I shoved a bag toward her, my hands trembling. She picked up the tooth and tucked it into her pocket before taking the bag and gliding back into the crowd. The concessions machines worked furiously that night, louder than ever, as if they were feeding off the presence of the guests. The popcorn overflowed in steady streams, the butter dispenser oozing thick liquid that smelled faintly metallic. The soda bubbled violently, hissing out foam that smelled like rotting fruit. And the film. God, the film. When the projector flickered to life, the screen showed my apartment again. This time, the door was open. The camera drifted inside, shaky and deliberate. It lingered on my kitchen, my hallway, my bedroom, and there I was sleeping, curled on my side, the blanket pulled up to my shoulders. My knees nearly buckled. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to turn away, clutching the counter like it could keep me upright. But the whispers rose louder, insistent, pulling me back toward the screen. When I finally gave in and looked again, the camera had moved closer. My sleeping face filled the screen. My chest rose and fell gently. The image lingered for too long, like it was daring me to breathe differently, daring me to acknowledge that I wasn't alone when that footage was taken. Someone had been in my apartment. No, something. The guests sat silent, their pale faces glowing in the flickering light. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They were watching the film, but I knew deep down it wasn't the movie they cared about. It was me. A sudden sound broke the silence. A low, heavy knock echoed through the theater. It wasn't coming from the doors. It was coming from inside. 3 knocks, steady, patient. My chest seized. I scanned the lobby, the concession stand, the rows of seats. The guests didn't react. The knocking came again, louder this time, shaking the floorboards. I shouldn't have moved. The rules didn't say anything about knocking, but something in me couldn't stand still. I followed the sound down the side hallway, past the old storage rooms, until I reached a door I hadn't noticed before. It was painted black, the wood swollen with age. A faint glow bled through the cracks around the frame, pulsing like breath. The knocks came again. I pressed my ear against the door, and I heard my own voice. "Let me out!" I stumbled back, heart pounding in my chest. My voice, no question. It was me on the other side of that door. The whispers rose suddenly behind me. I spun, but the hallway was empty. Still, I could feel them, brushing against my skin, pressing into my ears. "Don't open it," they hissed. "Not yet." I fled back to the lobby, trying to steady my breathing. The concessions machines had quieted. The projector hummed steadily. The guests didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but I knew they'd notice where I'd gone. The rest of the night dragged on, each second heavier than the last. I couldn't stop thinking about the door, about the voice that was mine, but wasn't. When dawn came, the guests rose in unison and filed out into the fog. The film sputtered to an end. I waited until the auditorium was empty, then stepped inside. On the screen, frozen in the last frame, was an image of me standing in that hallway, staring at the black door. I hadn't looked up at the projector once that night. I hadn't seen a camera, but the film had captured me anyway. I killed the projector and stumbled outside, my legs weak. Mercer was waiting, as always. His pale eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time I thought I saw something like satisfaction there. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked. My throat was dry. It was me, my voice. He nodded slowly. "That's the next step. They're calling you through. The rules have kept you safe so far, but the theater doesn't just want ushers, it wants replacements." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm done." His smile was thin, cruel. "You think you can walk away? You've already opened the doors for them. You've already served them. You belong to the mirage now. It's only a matter of time before you're on the other side of that screen." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But in my pocket, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out with trembling hands. A new photo had appeared in my gallery. It was me, standing in the lobby, holding my phone. The timestamp was from 1 minute ago, but I hadn't taken it. The photograph in my pocket felt like an accusation. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as I stared at the image of myself on the lobby floor, phone in hand, the timestamp blinking like a mocking heartbeat. Mercer's shadow sat across the parking lot like a bench of patience, watching me with those pale eyes that saw too much. I should have quit then. I should have driven away, keys slamming into the ignition until the theater disappeared in my rearview mirror. But the thing that lived in the mirage had begun to rearrange my thoughts. It didn't need force. It simply threaded itself through my dreams and my waking hours until leaving felt like cutting out a part of myself. And there were other, practical things tying me there. Rent, a thin hope that if I kept following the rules I might survive, and the small, ridiculous idea that if I understood it, maybe I could beat it. So I came back the fifth night. The lobby was colder than it had any right to be. The neon burned steady now, bright enough to make the varnish on the ticket booth gleam. The key in my pocket weighed like a verdict. I unlocked the door at midnight without looking at the sky, without sensing the fog, as if all the world had narrowed to the thin slice of light spilling from the theater's threshold. They arrived thicker tonight, a tide of pale bodies pouring in like water. The murmurs in the lobby sounded different, sibilant, layered, as if 100 conversations were braided into one voice. Faces slid past me, some familiar, some new. There was a man in an army jacket with a medal pinned to his chest that read "For Valor," though the medal was pitted with age. There was a woman who smelled of lavender and old hospitals. They took their seats like a congregation taking communion, and the auditorium filled until the air felt dense enough to choke on. I went through the motions, popcorn, sodas, sweeping, my hands operating on a memory I'd carved into muscle. But the film in the projector had become the center of gravity. In the booth between reels, the whispers pressed through the metal grate, and the screen below was a separate living thing. It didn't just show the town anymore, it showed me in real time. Little, private things. Me locking my door earlier, me staring at the photograph in my pocket, the way I licked my thumb to smooth a crumpled receipt. The camera angled and lingered, an invisible voyeur that knew the private choreography of my days. Halfway through the night, a woman in a sun-faded dress came to the counter. She didn't want popcorn or soda. Instead, she placed both palms on the glass and stared at me with wet, reflective eyes. "You know the rules," she said. Her voice was a rustle, but you read between them. She tapped the booklet I'd been carrying like talisman, though I had hidden it inside the drawer. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice small. She smiled in a way that made her face ripple like water. "They want performers now, not just watchers. We're tired of the screen." Her fingers left a smear on the glass that looked like ash. "They want more life to mirror." I wanted to laugh it off, to call Mercer and tell him his theater had become a lunatic's dream. Instead, I brushed my hands on my apron and felt the film reel in my pocket like a second heartbeat. The nurse was gone, her empty seat silent among the rows. The film changed. The projector's light cut through the darkness and painted a street I recognized, but this time the movement was different. Figures in the frame stopped and turned toward the camera. One of them, small and quick, pointed directly at the screen and mouthed my name. My throat closed. The auditorium shifted. A rustle, as if the dead were repositioning to better watch. I went into the booth to check the reels. Threads of film unfurled like skin from bone. On them, scenes of my apartment, my childhood bedroom, the house where I'd grown up, places the dead had no business photographing. The film smelled faintly of iron. When I ran my finger along the edge, it left a red smear. "Stop it," I whispered to the machine, as if the projector had ears. The machine hummed back, indifferent and ancient. That's when the person from the photograph appeared, standing in the center aisle of the auditorium. Not a guest this time. It was me, my face pale on a body that moved like mine, gestures exact to an awful degree. I watched my double lift a hand and nothing more. No sound, just motion. And the audience leaned forward as if the movement had weight. My mouth tasted of copper. I thought, absurdly, that if I broke a rule, if I spoke, if I asked the guests a question, maybe the spell would fracture. I stepped down from the booth and onto the aisle, moving with the clumsy certainty of someone who desperately wants to be seen. "Who are you?" I asked, and the words struck the room like a stone. A dozen heads turned, but none toward me. They were all looking at the screen, at the moving image of me that had somehow stepped from film to life on the floor. The double mimed more complicated things now, opening a door, talking on a phone, cradling a child, and the audience watched as if reading from the hands of a priest. Then someone clapped. Not politely, not a single clap to be courteous. A dry, wet sound like a palm smacking into rotten meat. Others joined in, slow at first, then building into a rhythm. The applause wasn't for me. It was for the image on the screen, the perfected mimicry of my life. I felt naked and ridiculous on the aisle. A child's voice, a real child, whispered behind me, and I startled, turning. No child was there, yet the whisper continued, a breath against my ear. "You're next." Panic is a simple thing. It makes decisions for you that you will later regret. That night, it made me run. I bolted through the back corridor, past the storage room that smelled of mothballs and old paint, toward the black door I discovered nights ago. Some strange idea that whatever was on the other side would be different, that answering that knock would stop the knock from happening everywhere else. The door was warmer than it should have been, the glow under the crack steady like a heartbeat. When I pressed my hand to the wood, it felt alive, soft, almost pulsing. Something on the other side rattled, and a voice, my voice, said with patient insistence, "Let me out." I pressed my ear to the door and heard more. Not just my voice, a chorus of voices, small and large, male and female, all threaded together. They spoke in fragments, names, places, childhood secrets. The sound was intimate and painful, a chorus of memories trying to bargain its way free. Something else nudged my shoulder from behind. I spun, expecting Mercer, but instead the woman in the sun-faded dress stood there impossibly close, her breath cool on my neck. "You can't open it," she said. Her voice had no malice. "Not tonight." "Why?" The word was raw. If it's me, if it's them, if they're trapped, won't opening it help? She laughed then, a sound like bones clinking. "You misunderstand. This isn't a prison, not one we can undo. It's an appointment. She stepped back into the shadow like a marionette pulled out of sight. You keep the rules because that's how they learn to wait. Break them and you teach them names. A name is a small thing. It is also everything. The dead did not need my consent to watch me, but Mercer had always insisted on the rules as contractual, a way to keep the balance. The woman's words turned Mercer's rules into something else. Less protection, more training manual. I shoved my palm against the door. What do you want? She tilted her head. You. Your life as a demonstration. We are tired of the old reels. We want something more. Blood. A pulse. The difference between a replay and a performance is small. My chest tightened. I could feel the audience's attention like a pressure. The screen below flickered, and the image of my double moved forward toward the aisle where I stood. It raised its hand, and for a moment the mimicry faltered. Tiny, human, like a glitch in a puppet. My double looked at me, and for an instant the eyes were mine, wide and terrified. Don't let them take you without a fight, the double mouthed silently. But then its mouth slackened, and it resumed moving by itself, acting out my life with unnerving calm. I backed away from the door. The woman smiled sadly. Soon you won't need rules at all. You will understand in the end that they only want to be watched. I left the corridor and walked slowly into the lobby. Outside, the sky had not yet lightened. Inside, the theater hummed with expectation. The guests were standing now, slowly forming lines at the exits as if rehearsing for departure. Some left through the doors into the fog. Others lingered, looking back at me with mouths parted in silent applause. As dawn edged the boards with gray, the projector sputtered to a close. The last frame was my double standing under a streetlight, the same streetlight that illuminated the theater's parking lot, which meant impossibly that the screen had found a way to include the theater within itself. The image froze, and the auditorium let out a sound that was almost a sigh. I waited until the seats were empty. My legs felt rubberized, and my knees ached as if I had been kneeling. On the center seat, there was a single ticket, yellowed and brittle as all the rest. My name was written on it in cramped ink. On the back, in the same hurried scrawl that had filled the rule book, was one line. Tonight, be the show. I folded the ticket between my fingers until it bit into my skin. The theater was quiet, but the silence was not peace. It was the hush before an organ starts, an audience readying itself for the first chord. I drove home that morning with the engine off, as if moving would wake the dead. At home, my apartment smelled of the theater. I couldn't tell if the scent had followed me or if I'd carried it there. In the bedroom, the blanket was folded neatly, but an impression of a sleeping body pressed into it, my imprint already taken, a ghostly outline of shoulders and hips. When night came, I didn't know if I would go back. The ticket in my pocket burned like a coal. If the theater wanted a performance, what could I do? Refusal felt impossible. Compliance felt like offering my skull on a platter. There was a third thing, a dark idea that folded in my brain like a map of escape. If the show needed a life, perhaps I could give them a different ending. I fell asleep with the ticket on my nightstand. In the dream, the theater was full. My double took a bow, and the audience rose. They applauded, and in the sound I heard my own heartbeat, steady and stubborn beneath the clapping. Then the screen blacked out, and from the auditorium a single voice called out my name. Not in menace this time, but like a plea. I woke with my mouth dry and a decision forming like a bruise. I didn't know if it was courage or madness. I had rehearsed endings for a week inside my head, and none of them were pretty. A dozen escape plans formed and dissolved in the space between dusk and midnight. Smash the projector, burn the reels, drive the car through the front doors, set the building on fire. All of them felt too simple, too small beside the thing that had been patient enough to wait for me and meticulous enough to learn the cadence of my life. When the sun slipped away on that last night, I still didn't know if what I was doing was brave or insane. I had a plan that lived halfway between both. It relied on a truth I discovered. The theater didn't need bodies that were dead in the traditional sense. It thrived on attention, on being watched. The films wanted motion to copy, gestures to imitate. If I could change what they watched, feed them a show that unsettled their appetite, maybe I could starve them. The ticket in my pocket felt like a hot coal. I'd written on the back with Mercer's fountain pen while he had a cigarette and pretended to read the rules. Tonight, be the show. The pen had left a dent on the paper, as if the ticket itself were a pulsing thing. I folded into quarters and tucked it between my ribs under my shirt against my skin. I wanted, in the absurd and desperate way people do before a jump, to feel something human between the theater's cold and me. The lot was full when I turned the key at midnight. Not just guests, they'd always come, but a different hum of expectation. The neon sign shuddered in an almost communicative rhythm. Inside, the place shivered as though waking from a bad dream. Mercer was waiting in the lobby, hands folded, a small smile at his mouth like someone greeting a friend who had come to dinner. He nodded when he saw me, as if the whole conversation had been arranged by common consent. "You look resolved," he said. His voice was soft. The softness made me sick. "I'm going to give them a performance," I told him. Truth is, I didn't know if the words were a promise or a lie. I whispered to steady myself. Mercer laughed once, a sound like a paper bag crushed. "That is the only thing they respect. Make it good." He put a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was warm in a way that made my skin crawl. "And remember the rules." I moved through the motions as I always had: popcorn, sodas, sweeping. The machine spit and hissed. The audience filled the seats in ceremonial quiet. The projector hummed like a living thing. When I climbed the booth steps and threaded the reel into place, the film this time was blank. No frames, just a thin emptiness like a mouth without teeth. I almost laughed. Whatever had been recording me had stopped being modest. Tonight it wanted to watch me live, not through the safe distance of celluloid. I turned to the auditorium to find my double already standing in the center aisle, pale as old paper. It moved with my gait, a mirror with depth. When it turned, it held my face perfectly, my jaw, the little scar at the corner of my lip. It mouthed something I couldn't hear. The audience leaned in, as if the double were speaking lines they'd memorized. I'd decided what the performance would be. I climbed down into the aisle and walked toward the figure with the slow certainty of someone who has boxed themselves into a corner and found the only door unlocked. My palms were sweating so badly the ticket in my shirt crinkled like an insect. People watched me with reverence and hunger. The dead taste is always thirsty for surprise. I stopped a few feet from my double. It didn't move. It was like looking at a photograph come to breath. I thought of the black door in the back hall and the chorus of voices I'd heard pleading for release. I thought of the photographs left on seats and the way my apartment felt pre-owned now by someone else's film. I thought of the boy who'd whispered, "You'll be in it soon," and felt a strange resolve temper the fear. I lifted my hands and began to perform. Not the small rote movements they wanted, pouring a drink, locking a door, but the things that felt painfully human and private and messy. I unfolded the ticket and read aloud the scrawled line Mercer had written as if it were scripture. I told the audience about the smell of my mother's kitchen, about the way my father's laugh had sounded like a belt being snapped, about burning my hand on a stovetop when I was 8, and how the scar on my thumb had never fully faded. I spoke of the ugly, of the tender, of debts unpaid, and the small kindness of strangers. I said names, real names, names that meant something in the world beyond the theater. And each time I spoke one, a ripple passed through the seats. They listened. Up close, I could see that their faces were not empty. There was hunger, yes, but there was also recognition, like the memory of something they had once been allowed to feel. The mall cop with the medal, the nurse with the tooth, the woman in lavender, their eyes glinted. My words made them human again. And for a reckless moment, I wanted to believe that was the point, to remind them of their former lives and set them free by the light of remembrance. Then the projector changed. A white flare popped on the screen and an image burned into being. The black door, my palm pressed against its wood, the glow from the cracks pooling like a ruined moon. Behind that, the film showed the corridor and a cluster of faces pressed to the other side, mouths moving like wind through parted shutters. My voice echoed from the film, reading the ticket, and in the projection my double moved differently, no longer miming but acting with a will of its own. It smiled at no one, and then, with my face, laughed. It was a laugh that did not belong to me. The auditorium shifted. and a new hunger rose. They no longer wanted to be reminded, they wanted to be fed. The applause that followed my words was not gratitude. It had the wet quality of consumption. The double on the film started to bow, and the audience rose to their feet as if moved by a single, hungry limb. Panic is a funny thing. How quickly it hardens into a logic. I ran. I ran not because I expected escape, but because I had to move, to displace the narrative the theater was already writing. I ran to the booth and yanked the projector's feed. For a second, everything went white, a silence so complete it was a physical blow. The guests, suspended like hanging fruit, stared into nothing. Their pale mouths formed O's of confusion. I grabbed the film spool and the reel in my hands. It was warm and not inert. There was a subtle vibration under my fingers like a heartbeat. I pulled and the film resisted, stubborn and alive. When I forced it out and held it up, the images smeared and slid under the light like blood on grease. On one frame, I saw my kitchen table. On the next, a child's shoe. And after that, a face that was mine, but also not. A mouth slightly crooked where terror had rearranged it. I thought of burning it. I thought of smashing the projector and watching the building collapse in a shower of old paint and rotten seats. But as my fingers tightened on the reel, a realization as cold as the theater's concrete set into me. Killing the film might not stop the watching. The movie house had learned to record from life, destroy the spool, and it would only seek a new medium. It didn't crave literal reels. It craved witness. So I did something that felt worse than all my other plans combined. I threaded the reel back into the projector, not to play it, but to make the theater look. I needed them to see what choice they were making. I climbed onto the stage, stood in the rectangle of light like a guilty thing on an altar, and held the reel up so every face could see it. Look, I said. My voice sounded small in that enormous room. This is not your life. This is my life. My mistakes, my scars, my loves, my shame. You can copy it. You can mimic it until the end of time, but you cannot own it. I jabbed a finger toward the booth where Mercer stood like a calm god. You listen to him, and you forget that you were people once. You are not trophies. The nurse's mouth opened, and sound, hoarse and ancient, came out like the first breath after a long dive. The audience shifted as if hearing a new lecture. Mercer's face tightened, the smile folding. He took one step forward, and behind him the double on the screen, me laughing, paused and looked directly toward the booth. For a sliver of a second, our eyes met through the projector's light, and there was understanding. The theater wanted a transfer, a handoff. I had one desperate, terrible thought. If it took life by imitation and by attention, maybe it could be turned back by misdirection. I reached into my shirt, found the ticket, and with a palm slick with sweat, I tore it in half. I threw one half toward Mercer. His eyes flicked down to the paper, and for a heartbeat he looked younger, scared, like a child caught in a terrible game. He bent to pick it up from the floor. That was all I needed. I shouted the last thing I thought of in the seconds before all reason collapsed. Remember your faces. Remember who you were. Shouts are contagious even in a room of the dead. A ripple of sound moved through them, a rustle like sheets in a breeze, and for a blinding instant, the auditorium was filled with voices. Not the hoarse whispers, but real voices, cracking and jagged, names and apologies, and the memory of what it tasted like to be alive. The effect was not instant liberation. It was messy and abrupt, like light blasting through a stained glass window and splintering into shards that didn't know which way to fall. Mercer looked up, horrified and furious. He lunged toward me. The reel slipped from my hands and spun across the floor into the aisles, wrapping like a live thing around a row of seats. He hit the tape with his knee and it snagged, tearing a long, wet ribbon. The projector's hum changed pitch, a keening note that resonated through the bones. The dead stumbled, not in unison but in the clumsy, human way real bodies do when they forget choreography. Some collapsed, some stood. Some tried to clap, but their hands flapped without rhythm. In the confusion, Mercer tried to pull me back toward the booth, to drag me into the routine. He tasted more desperate than I'd ever seen him. I wanted to destroy him with a shovel, with fire, with the blunt edge of anything. Instead, I did the thing that felt the most like choosing me. I ran. I ran past the rows, past faces that recognized pain again, past the woman in lavender who mouthed my name like a benediction, and out into the parking lot where the fog had thickened into a blanket. I didn't look back until I had my car keys in the ignition and my hands on the wheel. The theater glowed like a fever dream behind me. Inside, the projector's light shuddered and then went out. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, a scatter of figures spilled out through the doors into the night, blinking as if waking from a long dream. In the months after, the town of Ravens Hollow seemed to breathe in a different rhythm. People who'd been listless again took jobs, laughed at small things, argued about trivialities like who used the last coffee cup. The news had one brief line about the old Silver Mirage reopening for a time and then shutting down again. When I drove by, the building looked tired but empty, the neon sign dead. A for sale sign leaned against the fence like a headstone. But the thing about bargains is that they take something even when they give. I had run. I had saved names and faces in the theater for reasons I didn't fully understand. I had not, however, saved myself. Sometimes at night, when the world is thin and the air smells of popcorn and ozone, I imagine a dark room in a single bright rectangle. I imagine a crowd leaning forward to watch the life of a stranger pour out in light. I imagine the projector's hum coming from somewhere inside the house, a closet, the attic, the television in the corner. Once, in a winter that tasted like pennies and regret, I found a photo slipped under my door. It was me, in a hallway, looking at a black door. The timestamp was from 1 minute ago. I keep the other half of the ticket folded in an old book. I don't know what it does, if anything. Sometimes I sleep with the book on my chest, and sometimes, when the air smells like buttered corn and someone on the radio says a name I used to know, I hear my own voice from the faraway dark, reading lines I thought I'd left behind. Mercer disappeared. Nobody saw him leave. A rumor ran through town that the man who once ran the Silver Mirage had been found on the far edge of the county, sitting and humming under a streetlight, eyes bright and feverish as a neon sign. Someone picked up his keys and kept one as a curiosity. The rest of the world went on. If you ever drive through Ravens Hollow at night and the old marquee blinks back to life, if a line of pale figures files out of a place that should have been shuttered years ago, remember this. The dead are not content to watch. They want an audience. They want names. They want pieces of us. And sometimes, if you are very still, you can hear the projector hum through your walls. If you've stayed with me through the end of this story, I want to thank you, my fellow night owls. Your time, your attention, and your presence here mean more than you can imagine. This channel is our little corner of the dark, a place where stories breathe and shadows have a voice. If you felt a shiver, if you walked with me through the silence of that haunted theater, then you're already part of this strange family. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every small action you take keeps this fire burning in the dark. The more you support, the more nightmares and mysteries we can unravel together. So until the next tale, keep your lights low, your heart steady, and remember, you're never truly alone in the night, because we night owls watch together.